The rhythmic, sterile beep of the cardiac monitor was the only sound that acknowledged Clara's existence. For the past 8 hours, she had been a ghost in blue scrubs, gliding through the chaos of the St. Jude's emergency department with a quiet efficiency that made her invisible. At 52, with streaks of premature silver in her tightly pinned hair and a subtle, persistent limp she tried to hide, she was an anomaly among the bright, ambitious 20-somethings who populated the night shift. They saw a quiet, slightly broken woman past her prime. They didn't see the coiled steel in her posture or the way her gaze never rested, constantly sweeping the room, assessing, cataloging. They didn't understand that her silence wasn't timidity. It was discipline. "Clara, where in God's name is the pediatric crash cart? Did you restock it after the code last night?" The voice, sharp and dripping with condescension, belonged to Dr. Preston Sterling. He stood, a monument to arrogance in a perfectly tailored white coat, his Ivy League credentials practically gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Clara turned, her face a neutral mask. "Yes, doctor. It's in its designated alcove. I checked it myself at the start of my shift. Everything's accounted for." Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, a habit she'd cultivated to avoid attention. Sterling sneered, a performative act for the younger nurses, Jessica and Greg, who snickered behind their clipboards. "You checked it? The way you checked Mrs. Henderson's IV? The one I found dripping all over the floor? This is a top-tier trauma center, not a retirement home clinic. We require precision. We require pace. Things you seem to be lacking." The accusation was a lie. Clara had personally replaced the IV line after the patient, delirious, had pulled it loose. She had even noted it in the chart, a chart Sterling clearly hadn't bothered to read. But to argue would be to invite more scorn. So she simply nodded, her eyes downcast. "I'll double-check it, doctor." "Maintain cover. Do not engage. The mission is to remain unseen." The words were an old mantra, a piece of a life she had buried under years of sterile linoleum and the smell of antiseptic. Her limp felt more pronounced as she walked away, the familiar ache in her left femur, a phantom of exploding metal and Afghan dust. The shrapnel was still in there, a permanent souvenir the surgeons at Landstuhl had decided was too risky to remove. Sterling thought it was arthritis. He'd once loudly suggested she apply for a disability placard. She found the card exactly where it should be, fully stocked. Every ampule, every laryngoscope blade, every intraosseous needle was in its place, arranged with a geometric precision that bordered on obsessive. It was the only control she had left. "See, everything's fine," a young intern, Ben, whispered as he passed her. He was new, still possessed of a kindness the hospital hadn't yet eroded. "He's just like that." Clara gave him a small, tired smile. "It's fine." It wasn't fine. The constant grinding humiliation was like sandpaper on her soul. Sterling's cruelty was a scalpel, methodically dissecting her confidence in public. He mocked her age, her limp, her quiet nature. He called her a liability, a relic, and she let him. Because in this world, she was nobody. That was the point. Anonymity was safety. It was peace. The clock on the wall ticked past 6:55 a.m., 5 more minutes. She was meticulously wiping down her station, preparing for the handoff to the day shift, when a low, guttural thumping began to vibrate through the building. It started in the floor, a deep tremor that rattled the instruments in their steel trays. Jessica looked up from her phone. "What is that? An earthquake?" Clara didn't need to look. She knew that sound. It was the sound of heavy rotors beating the air into submission. Not the high-pitched whine of a civilian life flight, but the deep percussive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of military hardware. Multiple contacts, heavy lift, coming in fast and low. Her body went rigid. Her gaze snapped to the wide bay windows overlooking the city. 3 dark shapes, matte black against the bruised purple of the dawn sky, were descending toward the hospital's rooftop helipad. They weren't medical helicopters, they were MH-60 Black Hawks. Before anyone else could process it, the overhead PA system crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice strained with panic. "Code triage, mass casualty incident. A news helicopter has gone down on the I-5 overpass, 2 blocks north. Multiple vehicles involved, multiple critical injuries. All available staff to the ER now." The world exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses and doctors flooded the emergency bay, their faces grim. The quiet hum of the night shift was replaced by the shriek of incoming sirens and the frantic shouts of preparation. Dr. Sterling, in his element, began barking orders. "Get me 5 trauma bays prepped. I want blood on standby, Oneg, Jessica, Greg, with me. Clara, you handle triage intake at the door. Just tag them and move them. Try to keep up." It was a demeaning job for a senior nurse, a gatekeeper role usually given to residents. But Clara just nodded, her face impassive. She moved toward the ambulance bay, her limp forgotten. Her mind was already running calculations: multiple vehicles, overpass, fall risk, crush injuries, massive G-force trauma, burns. The first ambulance screamed into the bay. The doors flew open, revealing a nightmare of blood and twisted metal. 2 paramedics were frantically bagging a firefighter whose face was a mask of crimson. Male, 40s, firefighter, crushed chest, flail segment, probable tension pneumothorax, GCS of 5. They wheeled him in. Sterling took one look. "Get him to Trauma 1. Get me a chest tube tray." Clara's eyes narrowed. "No time. He's cyanotic. Tracheal deviation to the left. He'll be dead before you get the tray open." As they rushed the gurney past her, she moved with a speed that stunned the paramedics. She snatched a 14-gauge angiocath from a passing cart. "What are you doing?" Sterling bellowed, seeing her approach the patient. "He doesn't have time, doctor," Clara said. Her voice was different. Gone was the whisper. It was replaced by a clipped, authoritative tone that cut through the noise. "He's got minutes, seconds. Get away from my patient. That's an order." She ignored him. Her hands, which sometimes trembled when holding a coffee cup, were rock steady. With an unnerving calm, she palpated the firefighter's chest, found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She swabbed the area with an alcohol pad she'd palmed from the triage desk. "Security!" "Get this woman out of here!" Sterling shrieked. Pop hiss. The needle slid between the ribs with practiced ease. A geyser of trapped air and blood sprayed out, and the firefighter's chest, which had been unnaturally inflated on one side, visibly fell. The frantic beeping of his pulse oximeter began to steady, the numbers climbing from a deadly 72% to 85%, then 90%. He had a chance. Sterling stared, his mouth agape. The entire bay had fallen silent for a split second, witnessing the perfectly executed needle decompression. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The slow, incompetent old nurse had just saved a man's life with a procedure most residents fumbled. Before he could speak, the next wave hit. A car full of civilians, a police officer with a compound fracture. The chaos resumed, but something had shifted. A few of the younger nurses and Ben, the intern, were now watching Clara. She was no longer just tagging patients. She was a whirlwind of quiet competence. She spotted a subtle bleed others missed, applied a tourniquet with brutal life-saving efficiency, and diagnosed a critical head injury with just a glance at a patient's pupils. Her movements were economical, precise. Every action had a purpose. There was no wasted energy. It was a terrifying, beautiful dance of medical grace under fire. Then, the main casualty arrived. The doors to the ER burst open, and a group of grim-faced men in dark suits pushed through, clearing a path. In the center of their phalanx was a gurney carrying a man in a torn, blood-soaked dress uniform. Stars glittered on his shoulder boards. A 3-star general. He was pale, his breathing shallow. A large piece of shrapnel protruded from his abdomen, just below the rib cage. "He was in a car under the overpass when a piece of the rotor came down," one of the suits, a Secret Service agent, yelled. "He's losing blood fast." Sterling, seeing the stars on the uniform, practically shoved his own staff aside. "Bring him to me. Trauma 3. This is my patient." They got the general into the bay, and Sterling began his assessment, shouting for vitals, for blood, for an OR. Clara stood at the edge of the room, watching. Her eyes weren't on the monitors. They were on the wound. Shrapnel. Jagged. Location suggests possible splenic or renal artery involvement. He's hypotensive and tachycardic. It's not just blood loss. He's going into shock. Sterling is focused on the bleed, but he's missing the bigger picture. "Pressure's dropping, 80/40, Jessica called out. "Push 2 more units of ONEG, Sterling commanded, fumbling to pack the wound. "Someone get me the chief of surgery on the phone." He's crashing, Doctor. The general's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, landing on Clara for a moment. A flicker of something crossed his face before his eyes rolled back. The monitor flatlined. A single piercing tone cut through the room. He's in V-fib, starting compressions, Greg yelled, jumping onto the gurney. Charge the paddles to 200, Sterling shouted, grabbing them. No! The word was a gunshot. Everyone froze. Clara had moved to the bedside. Her face was granite. Stop compressions, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her. Look at the monitor. That's not V-fib, it's PEA. He has a pulse, it's just too weak to register. You shock him now, you'll kill him. Sterling turned, his face purple with rage. I am the attending physician here. You are a nurse. You will do as you are told, or I will have your license. Clara didn't even look at him. Her eyes were locked on the patient. His belly is rigid. He's bleeding out internally. The shrapnel is acting as a plug. You need to get him to an OR 10 minutes ago, but first you have to stabilize him. He needs a central line and a massive transfusion protocol initiated. Now. She began issuing orders with a speed and clarity that was breathtaking. Ben, get me a Cordis 9 French. Jessica, call the blood bank. Activate MTP. I want a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of packed cells, plasma, and platelets. Greg, stop gawking and get me a Belmont Rapid infuser. They stared at her, then at Sterling, then back at her. In her eyes, they saw an absolute certainty that their chief of trauma lacked. Ben, the intern, broke first. He ran to get the central line kit. Then Jessica grabbed the phone. I will have you all fired, Sterling raged, his authority crumbling. I am in charge here. At that moment, the glass doors to the ER slid open with a pneumatic hiss. But it wasn't more patients. 6 men clad in matte black tactical gear entered the room. They moved with the fluid, predatory grace of apex predators. They wore no insignia, but their bearing screamed special operations. They swept the room, their eyes missing nothing, their M4 rifles held at a low ready. The chaos of the ER seemed to shrink away from their silent, lethal presence. The lead operator, a mountain of a man with a scarred face and cold, intelligent eyes, scanned the scene. His gaze passed over the doctors, the nurses, the Secret Service agents, and then it locked onto Clara. Every ounce of tension left his body. His posture, which had been coiled for violence, shifted. He took a step forward. Dr. Sterling, seeing them, puffed out his chest. This area is a sterile medical environment, he announced officiously. You have no jurisdiction here. I must ask you to leave. The operator ignored him completely. His eyes were fixed on Clara. He walked directly to her, the 5 other soldiers fanning out behind him, creating a perimeter, their backs to her, facing outward. It was a classic diamond formation, a protective detail. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. He looked at the blood on her scrubs, at the general on the table, and then back at her face. A look of profound relief washed over his features. Then, in the stunned silence of the emergency room, he did something no one could have predicted. He snapped his heels together, his back ramrod straight, and brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. Commander, he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble. Angel 6, you're a hard woman to find. The other 5 operators, without turning, snapped to attention. Dr. Sterling's jaw dropped. Commander, what is this nonsense? She's a nurse, a barely competent one at that. The operator's head snapped toward Sterling. The look in his eyes was so cold, so utterly devoid of warmth, that Sterling physically flinched. You will be silent, the operator said, his voice dangerously low. Or I will make you silent. He turned back to Clara. Ma'am, General Peterson is a Tier 1 asset. We were tasked with his security. We're here to extract. Clara finally looked away from her patient, her focus breaking. She gave the operator a slight nod. Master Chief, good to see you, Stone. She gestured to the general. He needs a surgeon. Now. He's got maybe 20 minutes. The general on the table stirred, his eyes cracking open again. This time they were clearer. He focused on Clara, his breath catching in his throat. Clara, he rasped, his voice weak. My God, it is you, Commander Hayes. The full name echoed in the silence. Commander Clara Hayes. Sterling looked like he had been struck by lightning. Commander? Hayes? That's impossible. She's Nurse Miller. Master Chief Stone took a deliberate step toward Sterling, his presence utterly menacing. This woman, who you call a nurse, is Commander Clara Hayes, United States Navy. For 6 years, she was the lead combat medic and tactical commander for a Joint Special Operations Task Force so classified. Its name is still a state secret. Her call sign was Angel 6, the Angel because she's the most decorated combat medic in the modern military, the 6 because she was in command. He pointed a gloved finger at the medals on the general's chest. She saved his life once before, in Kandahar, after an IED strike, performing emergency surgery with a Gerber tool and a Zippo lighter under direct enemy fire, an action for which she received the Navy Cross. Stone's voice dropped, becoming even more intense. This woman, who you called a liability, has field-expediently amputated limbs, performed thoracotomies in the back of a moving vehicle, and has held the hands of more dying heroes than you've seen patients in your entire pampered career. The limp you mock. It's from shrapnel she took pulling 2 of my men out of a burning helicopter. She wears more metal on the inside of her skin than you wear on your fancy watch. She didn't retire. She vanished, went off-grid to find some peace. He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. You are not fit to wipe the blood from her boots. You will stand down, you will shut your mouth, and you will let her work. Is that understood? Sterling could only nod, his face the color of ash. The nurses, Jessica and Greg, were trying to merge with the walls. Ben, the intern, just stared at Clara with something akin to worship. Clara, ignoring the drama she had caused, was already back at work. Stone, I need your team. We're moving him, now, to OR3. I need 2 of your men to carry the blood in the infuser. You and I will take the gurney. We're not waiting for an orderly. Yes, Commander, Stone said. The title as natural as breathing. As they began to move, the hospital's chief administrator, a flustered man named Peterson, came skidding into the ER. What is going on here? Who are these men? Stone paused, fixing the administrator with a glare. We are here on the authority of the Department of Defense, and we are here for her. He nodded at Clara. Any interference with her or her patient will be considered an act of obstruction against a United States military operation. Peterson's eyes widened in panic as he looked from the soldiers to the disgraced Dr. Sterling, and finally to the quiet nurse who was now commanding a team of elite operators. The power dynamics of his entire hospital had just been rewritten in blood and revelation. They moved the general, a swift, efficient column cutting through the hospital corridors. Clara didn't break stride, calling out vital signs, adjusting drip rates, her mind a supercomputer of trauma care. An hour later, General Peterson was stable, out of a successful surgery that Clara had advised on, her presence in the OR non-negotiable. Clara finally walked out into the ER lobby. It was quiet now, the worst of the rush over. Her shift had officially ended 2 hours ago. The 6 SEALs stood waiting for her, a silent honor guard. Dr. Sterling was there, being spoken to by 2 stern-faced military police officers and a weeping hospital administrator. His career was over. She walked past them all, her steps even, her limp barely noticeable. She was tired. The bone-deep exhaustion of a life she thought she'd left behind had settled back into her marrow. She reached the exit. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the pavement. She paused, her hand on the door. Ma'am? Master Chief Stone's voice was gentle. We can give you a ride. A debriefing is probably in order. Clara turned, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. It's all right, Master Chief. I can take the bus. She looked at the chaos she was leaving behind, at the lives saved, at the justice inadvertently served. My shift's over. And with that, Commander Clara Hayes, the ghost of the night shift, the angel of the battlefield, pushed open the door and walked out into the morning light, no longer invisible.